Hey,
Good morning.
how are you? Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, perfect.
I'm
Sorry
going to
for
try to
the
see if I
tardiness.
can't. No, not at all. I'm going to try to see if I can set myself up just a little bit differently here.
Okay, no
So,
problem. I'll hold on.
so I'm not doing a close up. Okay, there we go.
All right, we're all set. How you been, man?
I'm doing good. It's a nice Sunday morning. The birds are chirping. Yesterday I went out and got a little vitamin D. So I'm also very jazzed about having this conversation and going over some of the questions that we have to go over today.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, first and foremost, right, like we talked about,
Yeah.
toast. It's
Cheers.
a
Happy
Sunday.
Sunday. And
Cheers to you.
May is, Mental Health Awareness Month. So cheers to everyone out there that is talking about mental health, talking about mental illness, and doing something about it. So cheers to you, Comey, for this platform.
No, cheers to you as well for joining me. And what we have a really strong, or guess a good week coming up, starting tomorrow, right?
Yes.
The 18th to the 24th. We're gonna try to really push this platform and push some of the really important topics that we have talked about and that we will talk about again in the future. But so this week, I really wanted to do like a question and answer. Um and I try to push and get people to like submit questions, and we got some really good ones. And the first one that I kind of want to talk about is this whole thing of mental health versus mental illness. Um, you're actually the first person that highlighted that difference to me. Let me see here. We were having some technical issues. Okay, so we're good.
Okay, we're good now. I don't know why I lost sound there. Apologize.
Yeah, that's okay. No problem. I'll take the the AirPods out. So, um, you're actually the first person that actually really highlighted the difference to me. Mental health versus mental illness. Two completely different things. You have a mental illness, and I went through a low period where my mental health was in disarray. So I quickly want to start by just like going. So I went on the NAMI website, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and just trying to find like what they defined as what those things are, right? So like for them, they say a mental illness is a condition that affects a person's thinking, feeling, behavior, or mood. And these conditions deeply impact day-to-day living and may also affect the ability to relate to others. Is that how your experience was?
Yes.
And it
Yes,
still
for
is?
sure. And still is. And it's one thing that mental health and mental illness have in common is they both have behavioral side effects. And I think that's hard. It has been hard for our medical and scientific community to measure. Um, Obviously, we do a little bit better now, but it's the lack of control piece. With
Hmm.
mental health, I can change some part of my circumstance to affect my mood or how I'm feeling, the level of anxiety that I'm having. With mental illness, there's very little control that you have. It's a chemical imbalance. And so that's why medication is so important for mental illness because they have to replace what the body in its imperfect state has gotten rid of or didn't fully develop. Um,
Right.
so yeah.
And I mean, one of the things that I noticed too is that mental health, right? Like having your mental health being in a very poor state can lead to mental illness.
Absolutely.
Um,
Just
it
like a
can
poor
lead to
diet can lead to diabetes.
Right, right. And that's the whole point, right? That's the whole goal is as far as focusing on mental health, um, is making sure that we start dealing with it in the early stages so that it doesn't end up becoming something worse. Like for me, in my case, when I didn't deal with it, it led to depression, which is,
Hmm.
you know, a mental illness, which is horrible, which is something that is just harder to dig yourself out of. Um, and it's been really interesting to see some of the stats that I've seen, especially when it comes to like mental health in the U.S. That 1 in 5 adults experience some sort of mental illness. That was surprising to me. I
Yeah.
didn't expect that, right? Like, and especially when it comes to, um, I guess the different types of mental illnesses. 2.6% of adults have bipolar disorder.
Hmm.
6.9% of American adults have major depression. I mean, that speaks loudly to me.
Yeah.
It speaks to some of the changes that we need to make as a society, right? Like our culture needs to change in a way that focuses on dealing with these sort of things.
Yeah, I think that, I think part of the way that culture changes is by having conversations like this. And that's why I think it's so important for people to talk about it and to make it normal. It is a part of everyday life. And interesting with those numbers are available and provide, insight because those are the people who have reached out for help.
Right.
Those are the people who are on medication, that visit doctors, that are hospitalized, or et cetera, that they compile those numbers. But there are millions of people in this country and around the world who are suffering from mental illness and are not identified. Number one, because of the stigma around it. And number two, because we're very good in fooling ourselves and blaming it on other things or blaming it on other people and not really dealing with and looking clearly in the mirror at ourselves saying, what do I need to do?
Mhm.
So I would challenge that those numbers are probably even a lot higher than that, which is even
Oh, for
more
sure.
astonishing.
Oh, for sure. And even with that going into like suicide rates,
Yeah.
when it comes to men specifically, like the fact that we are less likely to talk about issues or we're less likely to come forth with any sort of problem that we're dealing with, right? Is a huge problem. And you see that be I guess you see it revealed in the stats for suicides,
Yeah.
um, with the fact that men are over 3 times more likely than women to commit suicide,
Correct.
and the fact that like especially when it comes to um, um, I guess people actually going through with it, which is a very sad thing, is that you know over 70% of men, this is a stat that I found, is that over 70% of men that commit suicide are white males, right? And then with that, we don't even deal with the fact that there are African Americans, there are Hispanics, there are Asians also going through this problem.
Hmm.
And it's more a show, it's more of a taboo in those communities to actually come forth with a problem like a
Correct.
mental illness or a mental health issue that you may have.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak, from my own experience and the Black community and Black families. I was dealing with symptoms of having a bipolar disorder for years. It was never really brought to my attention. We didn't talk about it, even though I knew that other members of my family were diagnosed as having a bipolar illness. And so it's astonishing to me that, for me, it culminated itself to a suicide attempt that I ended up being hospitalized for seeking treatment. And even then, I didn't get a diagnosis. And even then, no one in my community, my family, and my friends pointed out, say, "Hey, Christian, red flag. We think that there's something mentally wrong here. It's not that you're just overstressed or you have an intense situation going on." And so, in that, so that's kind of what made me when I became healthy, that's what started my advocacy. Is I realized how much this is not talked about in minority communities, how much this is not talked about with men,
Mm,
and the horrible side effect of not having these conversations is suicide. And
mm.
it's a real side effect.
So yeah, and you work specifically in your church, in your
Correct.
and you've had conversations with people, especially African American men, right?
Yes.
About dealing with their mental health, um, or their mental illnesses. What are some of the things you've learned?
One of the things that I've learned that is extremely, um, it wasn't shocking, it was just, it caused me to pause, was
Mm,
how many people know someone who clearly has a mental illness.
mm,
It's almost every single person that I meet. They
mm,
know someone who has a mental illness, whether it's a family member, a friend, a partner, or whatever. And the over the astounding question is, what can I do to help them?
mm,
How can I get them to get help?
mm.
So what was shocking to me is that if you broach the conversation, if you breach the conversation, pardon me, with individuals, they're ready to talk.
Right.
They'll open up, but it's a lot easier to open up to this type of conversation when you're talking to someone who can understand your cultural, family, and vernacular experience.
Yeah.
And so in that, I found that people speak up, especially when we're talking about African American men, they speak up more so to me than some of my non-African American and non-male counterparts who are doing this advocacy work within our church.
Yeah. Which is really interesting to see because, um, you have to, like, our culture really isn't structured to like allow people to get out there and really like find these resources or
Mm-hmm.
find help or find somebody to connect with, which then highlights the importance of like community building when it comes to mental health and when it comes to
Yes.
like men dealing with their mental health, which will then, as we spoke of before, if it's not dealt with, will lead to a mental illness, will lead to
Yes.
something in the future. I mean, it was just astonishing to see that African American men are 50% less likely than other men um, to seek help,
Yeah.
to seek advice, to seek, which then, goes into what you mentioned before is the fact that people only open up to you because they could relate to you, because they saw another person of color,
Yeah. Yeah. I,
which
I can
is
rem-
amazing.
yeah, you and I had this conversation before, and and I remember when I decided, this is something I was learning about my illness. I wanted to be well, and really, threw myself in it. I want to be well. How do I achieve that? What have other people done? And so I'm
Mm,
looking at blogs, I'm looking at videos and interviews, and I don't say this to be offensive. I'm just trying to make a point that it was like
mm,
the people that were speaking out about this were overwhelmingly non-minority women.
mm,
And, I can just remember reading one article from a lady in California who had a very similar experience of diagnosis as I did. Later in
mm,
adult life, it seemed to quote unquote come out of nowhere. And so, she went to a hospital. Her husband hired a nanny to take care of the children. When she came out of the hospital, her husband rented a cabin for her out in the mountains where she could
right.
really decompress before entering back into society. And I remember looking at that and literally throwing my iPad across the room at how unrealistic that was for a majority of
Mm,
people. I was a father, I was a husband, I had children, a wife who were depending on me to provide for them. And at the same time, I was getting out of the hospital and trying to figure out, how do I become well again? How do I go back to work? And so once I became healthy, I said, people need to know how you do this in reality. And that is one of the things that I've been very outspoken about, that we don't have adequate mental health care systems set up, even if you want to go get help. It's
mhm,
very difficult. I mean, just right now, the average wait time to try to get an appointment with a psychiatrist or psychologist to start medication management can be 6 months. Well, what are you supposed to do in the meantime of that?
Hmm.
Trying to find a therapist or a mental health counselor that can relate to your cultural experiences, your vernacular, the difficulties that you face as a man, particularly as a
Hmm.
man of color in this country with all the things going on in our backyard. It's very hard to talk to someone who can't relate to you. And so that's a turnoff.
Hmm.
So, there's all these barriers that exist specifically for men and for men of color when they're trying to get help.
So, and that's a fantastic point you bring up. That leads us into like the next question is, you know, how do you find a mental health counselor that really that you can connect with, like a good mental health counselor? How do you go about finding that? Like I remember my problems going through it and trying to figure out, you know, who do I go talk to, or like who can I schedule an appointment with? And I went through the list of like all these people in DC, and I just I just never felt like reading their short bios. I just never felt comfortable
Hmm.
choosing any one of them. So like
Yeah.
you went through this, you see someone regularly,
Yes.
um, and that's something that with in the time of COVID, I don't know how you've gone about that, but how did you go about finding a good person, somebody that you could connect with?
So for me, because I manage my mental illness with medication and with
Mm-hmm.
therapy, I have two different, people that are part of that team. I have a psychologist that I get therapy from, and I have a psychiatrist who manages my medication. Both were extremely difficult to find. Number one, and this is, I'm speaking from my personal experience, I take it with a grain of salt. Hopefully it helps.
Mm-hmm.
Be your own advocate as much as you can. And I know that that's really hard when you're in crisis and you're having a tough time and you're just like, I need help. The help, you feel like it should come a lot easier, but you
Mm-hmm.
have to be your own advocate. Don't allow anyone to just write your prescription and not go over side effects with you. Don't allow anyone to put you on medication that you don't understand exactly what symptoms they're trying to do. I had that experience with a doctor who just wanted to pull out his pad and write prescriptions. And I
Mm-hmm.
find myself taking all these medications supposed to help me feel better, and I felt like a zombie. I had no quality of life. So I learned that I had to advocate for myself and really stand up for myself when it comes to medication management. Secondly, for therapists, if at first you don't succeed, try and try again.
Trying it.
And, so first it was in-person therapy. I tried to find someone who was of a younger generation, but also had experience, just so they
Mm-hmm.
would be aware. I've had therapists tell me in the middle of going through crises to pull myself up on my bootstrap. Oh, that
Mm-hmm.
literally is the worst phrase in the world that you can use for someone who's going through a depressive state because it's not encouraging and it doesn't validate what they have going on. Or
Mm-hmm.
saying things like man up. So quickly, I learned how to identify those problem therapists and cut them off the list and move on to others. For me personally, I use a telehealth network
Mm-hmm.
for my therapy. And so I have a therapist that I meet with online.
Mm-hmm.
They do not live in my area. Luckily, right now, that's open for all insurances, whether you have Medicaid, Medicare, or private insurance. Hopefully, that will continue, post COVID. But
Mm-hmm.
I had the circumstances where I could meet with a therapist online that I found. She is an African American female,
Mm-hmm.
and and she can validate the things that I'm going through. I would just give a very quick example. I don't want to get off topic, but you
No
know,
worries.
with the onslaught, this constant news coverage of African Americans being murdered
Mm-hmm.
in 2020 in ways that I just my mind can't grasp. It was amazing talking to someone who, in our therapy session, teared up with me
Mm-hmm.
and validated what I was going through and understood the cultural resources that I have that I could lean on in those times.
Mm-hmm.
I have not had that in the past during, traumatic experiences, and it made a huge difference. But you have to search. There's a Black mental wellness group on Facebook. They also have a blog where they have therapists all around the country who are African American. I think there's one for Hispanics as well.
Mhm.
So there's more resources now than there were when I first started this journey 5 or 6 years ago.
5 or 6 years ago. And that's it's interesting that you say you were able to find someone because that's again I wasn't able to find anyone that could relate to what I'd gone through or that could relate to or like that from just the short bios
Yeah,
that I was confident enough would understand who I was, right, without just throwing prescriptions or without just throwing like
it took
antidepressants or
it took four
whatever it may
years.
be.
It took 4 years for me to find a therapist.
Wow.
It took me 4 years to find a therapist that I was totally 100% comfortable and trusted. I
Hmm.
emailed, I kind of like copied and pasted a little bio of myself, my experiences. I tried to keep it short to just a couple of paragraphs. And that's how I wanted to gauge response. So I would
Hmm.
send that as an inquiry to different therapists and gauge their response coming back to me. And that told
Hmm.
me a lot about, if that person took the time to read it and respond, or did I just get a general like, oh, thank you for sharing. Please reach out to my office to make an appointment. Or if I
Yeah.
got something with some meat into it. So that was a thing I tried. People can certainly try that.
Yeah.
And, just don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. I think that's I talk to people who are going through treatment, whether it's
Hmm.
therapy or medication, and the number one thing is like, well, my doctor said I have to do this or I have to take this or, well, why? And you can ask
Yeah.
that. There's nothing wrong with being your own advocate in treatment. I think that is just so important. But
So
again, oh, go ahead.
so how are you coping now during I guess during this time of COVID? How are you?
COVID has been an extreme roller coaster. I think I have gone through every emotion and side effect possible.
Yeah.
I very early on, I will say this, very early on, I recognized how off my sleep pattern was.
Hmm.
And because I've managed my illness for a few years now, I know that could trigger a manic episode. And so the first couple of nights I didn't pay any attention to. I was like, oh, I can't sleep, blah, blah, blah. And I moved on. And finally, around the fifth night, I woke up in the middle of the night. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't do anything. And I thought, oh, whoa, there's a pattern here. I immediately reached out to my psychiatrist, explained what the situation was, and got a medication to help with my sleeping pattern.
Hmm.
Um, had I not done that, there's no doubt in my mind I would have gone into a manic episode just with all of the stress that's going on.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult right now. So that was then. I addressed that. Right now, what I'm dealing with is anger and irritation, which
Hmm.
are not feelings and emotions that I'm used to feeling. But I get so irritated so very quickly, or I feel anger all the time, which is a symptom, response to stress, to anxiety. And so I'm trying to figure that out in therapy right now and really working through it. I'm fortunate that I can meet with my therapist more than once a week right now because I'm really trying to control that. In a personal experience in my life in the last week or so, there was an individual and just they were reaching out to me. It was a very stressful situation, and I just kept getting so aggravated and irritated.
Hmm.
And so I had to ask myself, like, Christian, is this you or is this them or is it the situation? And
Yeah.
really try to, as best as I possibly could, clearly say, okay, you're just stressed and this is not a normal reaction.
Hmm.
That has been the most difficult thing during COVID.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that because that's not only something that's only something that happens or has happened for you or for anyone during COVID, right? Like I think one of the main things is, and you brought it up, is as people dealing with any sort of um, mental illness or low or poor mental health status, um, and for males, one of the biggest things is to kind of like get in touch with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you mentioned that, and that's something I've had to do, right? Like figuring out, okay, this is where I am. Like when I'm in a good state, this is how I
Mm-hmm.
am. This is how I act. This is how I do things. This is, and then for me now, I am more able to recognize when I'm not doing well,
Yeah.
because I've already created that baseline, right?
Yes.
And which is something you've done. And to any other person, any other man, or any other individual out there, that's something that you could do is go ahead and, if you truly find yourself in a moment where you're having good, a good environment, a good mental state, jog that down, write that down, like
Yes.
write down every single like individual thing about it. Like, okay, like, like what do I do when I'm happy? What do I do when I'm in a good state? Like, what do I
Yes.
eat? What are some, so that way when you start going off of that path, you can easily like recognize that, oh, hey, I'm not doing well. Like for me, for example, like when I start drinking way more,
Mm-hmm.
like I know right away that I'm dealing with something that I need to figure out what it is, like
Yes.
that I don't know about, right? Like when um, like especially during these times of COVID, after losing my job and everything, and like being unemployed, I've been, I'm like, okay, in a good, healthy state for me, I go run, I
Mm-hmm.
exercise, I read, I keep my mind busy, I do research, I do all these things. And whenever I find myself like waking up and I feel like lethargic, or I feel like, I don't want to do anything today, I'm just gonna go like at 9 a.m. like go make a drink.
Yeah.
That's when I catch myself right away and I'm like, wait,
Red
dude,
flag.
red flag, like red flag comes out. He's like, dude, you're not. You got to go talk to somebody. And I'm lucky, to be honest, in this time to like have a great partner that I can like talk to and like, like just open up to. As hard as it is still for me to open up, even as someone that considers themselves a mental health advocate, to open up to
Mm-hmm.
my partner, somebody I trust. So that's really important. And this leads us into like our third and final question, which is, what do we do when our chosen coping method doesn't work anymore?
So that has been the hardest thing during COVID. I mentioned I've been on this journey of managing my wellness, managing my illness now for a few years. And I
Mhm.
have, things set up. My life is organized so that I can cope with stress and I can cope with this illness and living with it on a daily basis. Well, all of those coping systems that I've set up are now no longer available during COVID.
Right.
That has been very hard, and I've had to find new coping strategies.
Yeah.
I just want to say that for anyone watching this who is currently having a really rough time coping right now, don't beat yourself up because you're not doing this. Don't beat yourself up because you're not having conversations, you're not waking up in the morning and recognizing those red flags. It takes years of self realization, of conversations, of therapy to be able to get to this healthy state where you can see things. But I have had to find new ways, and I've also tried to do something new. I can sometimes perseverate on negative feelings. And so I had
Hmm.
trained myself to, if you're feeling negatively, move on to the positive. I've had
Hmm.
to tweak that during COVID and allow myself to feel what I'm feeling.
Hmm.
Sometimes that feeling may last a day.
Hmm.
Sometimes it may last more than a day. But when I allow myself to feel what I'm feeling, it's so much easier for me to wake up the next day and have a quote unquote good productive day. And so, which is very different. I didn't do that pre COVID. But during COVID, I'm allowing myself to feel the negative feelings, what's going on, why am I feeling like this, really talking myself through it and saying, Christian, if you need to take a day, it's okay, take a day.
Hmm.
If you need a moment, if you need an afternoon, if you need a morning, take it. Walking in fresh air has helped a lot.
Hmm.
Talking with friends, whether it's the telephone or video chat, has also helped. It's also helpful that my friends know that I have a mental illness. And I know that's very tough for some people because they don't want to be embarrassed, they don't want to be judged, they don't want to be treated differently. I will say this, you have good quality friends. I think this will always be the experience. When you tell your friends, your coworkers, your employers that you have a mental illness, that you're struggling with your mental health right now, and you're honest with them, I think people will be surprised at the support that they'll get. People will check in on them. People will be forgiving and understanding if they're not maintaining the responsibilities and duties that they're supposed to. And that has created this entire network and system where I can't talk to my therapist every day because I can't afford to do that. I can't run to my psychiatrist's office every time I have a symptom. But having people available or just having that understanding network has been a coping skill or strategy within itself. And just
Mhm.
knowing that no matter how bleak I feel, frustrated, anxious, depressed, irritable, that there is some hope, that
Mhm.
there are people who care. That is I think the highest thing for people in their mental health right now, especially for those who have diagnosed chemical imbalanced mental illnesses, is
Mhm.
not feeling alone, not feeling hopeless and helpless. And I want a movement. I want a movement. Be open. Have you have the hashtag real conversate, real convo, real talk. Have those conversations and let people know that you live with a mental illness. And I
Mhm.
really do think that the support that you get will be overwhelming.
Yeah, yeah, and I, to be honest, I couldn't have said that better myself. That was fantastic. And to echo that, it just highlights the importance of community, of having
Hmm.
really strong connections, and like in in these times, right? In these COVID times, we can actually see the good and the bad. The
Hmm.
bad is okay, yeah, you like if you are somebody that has had a mental health counselor that that you saw on a regular basis, you're lacking that kind of connection right now.
Yes.
But also, one of the things that I've noticed in my personal life, having the time doing this, like having the time now to really connect with my friends, right? Really connect with people that I haven't spoken to in forever, or
Hmm.
people that we just, we live in different states, and I can't really chat with them. I can't really see them. But now we have the emergence of all these like video chatting
Yes.
apps, Zoom and House Party and like Instagram Live and or Instagram chat and Facebook chat and all this stuff that's coming out now, and we're able to like actually create or like you know find these bonds again.
Yes.
We're really able to really like open up to people that we can trust, and that's the main point of this whole thing with Men Mental, is really creating a community, a virtual community, where people can feel at home and can feel like they can talk to anyone, and there's going to be there will be no judgment. There
Yes.
will be um, there will be support, and that's just amazing to see, and especially with us, like I've been incredibly grateful for our friendship, for how we came to be connected. Thank you,
Yes.
Marvin, for bringing us together. Um, but yeah, I encourage anyone out there that's like that watched this or is watching, um, please, like, especially if you're a man, if you're dealing with stuff that you don't want to open up about, we're just here to tell you it's okay to open up. It's okay to be at one with yourself. Um, the macho thing isn't really that great. Weakness can
Throw it
be
out.
a strength as well, right? Like,
I want to add on to
um,
that too, real quick, Comey, if it's okay, that even if you're not a male, but if you are living with a male or having a relationship, friendship, intimate relationship, sibling, whatever, who you are clearly seeing is not mentally, healthy,
yeah,
our instinct sometimes is to do things a certain way, but reach out. I think you're a great resource. They can certainly reach out to me as well. Reach out with questions of how you can help, because
mm,
sometimes in trying to help you can do more damage.
yeah,
And so even if you're not a male but you know a male who's struggling, reach out. We will be glad to listen and to give pointed advice on
mm,
how to support someone who's currently struggling and maybe is not responding to your very well-meaning efforts, which sometimes the well-meaning efforts are just not helpful.
Right. Yeah, perfectly said. I completely agree with that. Reach out to us, let us know. It's one of the things that is important is really important is having the ability or having um, one, the ability to open up, but the sense of trust.
Yes.
It's incredibly important if you trust that whatever you share, the person that you open up to is going to be able there to help you. And so, yeah, I appreciate everybody that has posed questions. We have many more questions that we're going to tackle later on.
Yes.
I feel like even like the mental health versus mental illness issue, we could have talked about that for like forever.
I have some pretty strong feelings about that, especially when
Right,
you have,
right.
celebrities joining the bandwagon, which it's always nice, right? They have a platform and they can get information out across, but sometimes things are not communicated effectively. And I
Yeah.
am ardent. I do a speaking platform to young people through an organization about balancing, your mental health and professionalism. And one
Mhm.
of the key points that I make in there is the difference between mental health and mental illness.
Mhm.
Everyone has mental health because
Mhm.
it's health. You have to manage it. But
Yeah.
mental illness is a chemical imbalance that you cannot control without
Mhm.
medication and therapy. And
Yeah.
those are the people who, those are the at-risk people. I mean, it is tough. I think we could have probably a separate conversation just on how different and how difficult that is and how hard
Yeah.
that is to explain to people. So
Exactly.
I'll save that for another conversation, but
Yeah.
it's definitely a point that I think would be very helpful to people. And
Mhm.
also on the flip side of that, people who are talking about their mental health and not
Mhm.
realizing that it's actually a mental illness.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I think one of the many things or one of the things that we have to do is actually get a mental health counselor professional onto one of these chats next time or one of, in the future and have them actually like clearly go through
Yes.
it and explain things to us, to people out there, because that's the biggest thing is we wait if we're dealing with stuff like this. We wait to like pay a huge sum of money to go see someone.
Hmm.
I think it will be beneficial to get a professional on this
Yeah.
and actually kind of have them go through the process and go through like the definitions and go through like some of the real world experiences that they've
Yes.
seen. So yeah. So Christian, I really appreciate you taking the time this morning
Thanks for
to
the
join me.
invitation.
Yeah, of course. It's always a pleasure to do this and have somebody that's actually also as dedicated um, to this. So
Well,
I thank you. Till next time.
till next time, cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Let me grab mine. Salute.
Salute. There we go.
And thank you all, everybody that tuned in and everybody that's still watching this. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Bye bye. Have a good day.
Take care.